Today's guest, Ben Feldman, proved with his first book, Butchery on Bond Street, that he could tell a fascinating story and depict New York history in a fashion relevant to modern literature. Now he's following the same formula with his new book, Call Me Daddy. Call Me Daddy is a story that brings to life the sensational Roaring Twenties tabloid story of New York real estate tycoon and publicity hound Edward West Browning. A story of a notorious mogul's lavish and controversial relationships with teenage girls close in age to his two adopted daughters and the legal and personal fallout that follows. With us is Ben Feldman. Ben.
Thank you, Kristal.
Nice to see you. Listen, first of all, with your first book, Butchery on Bond Street, which was a great success, I would have thought maybe you would have followed with another sensational murder story, but instead you went for the Peaches and Daddy story. How did you pick your subject matter?
Yeah, I stumbled into this story the same way I stumbled into Butchery on Bond Street. I do a lot of volunteer work out at Greenwood Cemetery in the historical archive there, and Daddy Browning is also buried at Greenwood Cemetery in a very much marked grave, not an unmarked one. And when I was going through Jeff Richmond's wonderful coffee table book about the cemetery several years ago, the first story I picked out to write about was Dr. Burdell, but I knew already what the second story I would write about was, and that was Daddy Browning. Not as gruesome, just as lascivious and an awful lot of fun.
Edward West Browning was a successful, prominent man around town, but was unlucky when it came to love.
Daddy Browning was the black sheep, a scion of the Browning family, but both Daddy Browning's father and his grandfather, and I think even his great-grandfather, were founders of a very, very, very successful New England clothing manufacturing and retail business known across the country. I think 15, 16 retail stores in major urban centers in America, 5,000 employees at one time turning out uniforms for the Mexican-American War. Even earlier than that, made a gold mine of money during the Civil War and became the manufacturing firm for rah-rah, boom-boom college outfits, railroad conductors. I mean, the Browning Company was the cat's pajamas. Edward West Browning didn't want anything to do with the family business, and when his father became blind and had to retire from the clothing firm and start investing in real estate, Edward joined his father and started making money late in the 19th century in New York City, buying occupied buildings. Edward West Browning did not marry for the first time until late in life. Quite an eye for the ladies, member of the Manhattan Congregational Church up on Broadway and 76th Street, where his parents attended, but never got married until he was 41 for the first time. He picked out a young woman, 18 years his junior, no record breaker, but still 18 years his junior, also a parishioner at the Congregational Church. Maybe he knew her in Sunday school. Maybe he even taught her in Sunday school. Daddy Browning was a guy to cross every line you could ever draw in the sand. And he courted this young woman. She was of a lower middle class background. Daddy Browning was already quite wealthy, known about town. They met, they wed. Adele Lowen didn't even have money for a wedding dress. Her parents were thrilled that she had met this wealthy real estate man. He was known all about town.
It was a Cinderella story. A Cinderella story that took a turn for the worse.
What does she do? Well, she gets frustrated. She starts fooling around with the family dentist, Charles Willen. Used to be known as Charles Wilensky, a Jewish guy, which is like a big scandal in these circles. Daddy Browning was from a waspy family. Adele Lowen was from a waspy family. She starts messing around with that Jewish guy, who it turns out was a gigolo and messing around with 40 other girls at the same time. Anyway, she starts messing around in 1922. And then, unfortunately, she contracts a very, very severe case of gonorrhea from Mr. Willen and ends up in Roosevelt Hospital, in the Sloan Hospital for Women. And Daddy Browning, of course, finds out about this. He pays to have her treated. They hire the best doctor in New York. She's in the hospital for 7 weeks. That's an STD. Daddy Browning then catches the couple on an ocean liner with a private detective he had hired on their way to Paris to whoopee it up over there. And at this point, he files a divorce action.
After the divorce, Browning found himself in the headlines again when he decided to adopt a teenage daughter.
He put an ad in the New York Herald Tribune advertising, a classified ad, advertising his need for a 14-year-old so-called playmate and companion to his younger daughter who would come live a very luxurious lifestyle in his home. Applicants to send photo and resume to his office further down West 72nd Street. 12,000 girls applied for this position in writing, and almost all of them were interviewed on his lap, one by one, sometimes with their mothers, waiting outside on 72nd and Broadway. He calls the Daily News, he calls the tabloids, and they're there witnessing this parade of people walking inside.
The successful applicant was Mary Louise Sposs, who said she was 16 years old and an orphan from Astoria, Queens. The fairy tale story was short-lived when the press found loopholes in her story.
The reporters go out there and they find she's not an orphan. There's her mom and dad, the super of the building, and his wife doesn't speak any English. But they're very happy that Mary Louise has gotten adopted, because she was going to go into pictures at Kaufman Astoria Studios, and they thought that wasn't so great. Well, it turns out she's not 16. She's 21. Okay, well, thank God she's of legal age. And Daddy Browning finds all this stuff out, and he has the adoption annulled after another week. He wanted a teenager, not a 21. I mean, what difference would it make? You know, but no 21-year-olds for him. And he paid the parents $1,000, $500 a piece, to just make nice and let it all go away, and it went away.
Shattered by the discovery, he turned his attention to an actress named Peaches.
Daddy Browning couldn't give it a break. I mean, he had a thing for would-be actresses, for buxom, zoftig, teenage girls, and it wasn't successful, and it was hard to get accomplished too, because all along throughout this story, Browning is calling the newspapers, and they're mad game. This is front page news day after day. Mary Louise Sposs and the adoption was front page news for days and days and days. Peaches and being selected, and the Cinderella, before they got married, front page news. In the New York Times, in the Gray Lady, it's front page news, much less the Post, much less the Herald Tribune, much less all
being
the
an actress papers. Peaches must have sort of
loved the publicity. You should see the headlines. They're screamers. And the child welfare authorities, unfortunately, also got after Daddy Browning. They were hot on his tail when word got out that Peaches and he were going to get married. Bird Kohler, who we know from the hospital on Roosevelt Island, this is who the guy was in the 1920s. He was Commissioner of Child Welfare and the Society for the Protection of Cruelty to Children. Got after Daddy Browning. They went to the district attorney in Queens, and they started to ask some questions there too, and tried to get him involved in the case. And Daddy Browning's too smart for all of them. He rented a house for Peaches and her mother up in Cold Spring, New York, so they could establish legal residence, and with literally hundreds of newspaper reporters on their tail, they all drove up there. She moved in. He got a marriage license. They got married. That marriage, I don't have to tell you, and as you mentioned, did not last very long. Mom moved in with her daughter. Moved in with her daughter and Daddy into the Kew Gardens Hotel right out there, Union Turnpike. It's not there anymore, but again, the site is there, right by the courthouse. After 6 months of coverage and shopping trips in Fifth Avenue every day, apparently some really bizarre things went on in the boudoir. And one day when Daddy was out to work, the Rolls Royce and a whole bunch of trunks were trooped out of the lobby of the Kew Gardens Hotel, and Peaches took it on the lam with her mom and about $25,000 worth of finery.
And what was Peaches' fate, as well as the rest of the cast of characters? To find out more, go to the book's website at
www.edwardwestbrowning.blogspot.com, and there's an awful lot of other information on that about the book, lots of pictures, and there's going to be more and more and more.
Well, thank you, Ben.
You bet, Kristal. Enjoy.
I will enjoy. Thank you.